She said we needed different futures, then asked if we could still stay friends. I wished her the best without negotiating. She didn't expect my absence to change more than my presence ever had. She didn't take the fig tree. That was the first thing I noticed, 3 days after she moved out, standing in the doorway of what used to be our living room in South End, looking at a 6-foot ficus she'd kept alive for 4 years through 2 apartment moves and 1 near disaster with the AC unit. She'd taken the couch. She'd taken the good knives. She'd taken the framed photo from our trip to Asheville, the one where neither of us were smiling right because the sun was in our eyes. She left the tree. I stood there for longer than I should have, coffee going cold in my hand, trying to decide if that meant something or if I was just a guy inventing meaning out of leftover furniture, because the alternative was thinking about anything else. 3 weeks earlier, Natalie had sat across from me at our kitchen table, the good one, the one with the wobbly leg we never fixed, and told me she thought we wanted different futures. She didn't cry when she said it. That was what I remembered most. Her voice was steady, like she'd rehearsed it in the car, which she probably had, because Natalie rehearsed everything. Wedding toasts, performance reviews, breakups, apparently. I still love you, she said. That's not what this is. Okay, I said, because I didn't know what else to say to that. I just think we've been wanting different things for a while now, and I don't think either of us has been honest about it. I asked her what she meant by different things, and she looked down at her hands, at the ring she wasn't wearing because we weren't engaged, just 4 years deep into an apartment lease and a life that had started to feel, to her at least, like a placeholder for something else. You're happy doing the same thing every day, she said. The lane management, the calls, the same restaurants on Friday. And I love that about you. I do, but I keep waking up wondering if this is it. If this is the whole shape of my life. I wanted to tell her that stability wasn't nothing. That I'd built something at Meridian Freight Solutions over 6 years, that I'd gotten my broker certification the hard way, nights and weekends, that being good at something ordinary wasn't the same as being asleep. But I didn't say any of that, because I could already tell it wasn't going to change her mind. And there's a particular kind of tired that comes from realizing an argument won't land before you've even started making it. Can we still be friends? She asked. I don't want this to be ugly. And that was the part that actually got me. Not the breakup. The request that came after it. So calm, so reasonable, like she was asking to keep a mutual gym membership. Sure, I said. I didn't negotiate. I didn't ask her to reconsider, didn't list the 4 years, didn't bring up the ring I'd been quietly pricing out at a jeweler on East Boulevard for the better part of that spring. I just said sure, and then I helped her carry a box down to her car 2 days later, and I said goodbye like a man checking out of a hotel he'd stayed in a long time and grown fond of, but never actually owned. What she didn't expect, what I don't think either of us expected, was that my absence would end up changing more than my presence ever had. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I want to be honest about something before I go further, because if I don't say it now, I'll lose my nerve. I wasn't a bad boyfriend. I also wasn't a particularly present one, not in the way Natalie needed. I loved her the way you love something you've stopped actively noticing, fully, but on autopilot. I noticed the fig tree needed water. I didn't notice, for longer than I'd like to admit, that she'd stopped bringing up her old dream of moving somewhere new. Somewhere she could start her own brand consultancy instead of managing someone else's marketing budget in a beige office park off Woodlawn. She'd mentioned Denver twice, that I remember. Once at a dinner party at her friend Priya's place, half joking, and once alone in bed, quieter, more serious, and I'd said something like, yeah, someday, and gone back to scrolling load boards on my phone. Someday never got scheduled. That was the problem, if I'm being fair to her, which I'm trying to be, for months later, writing this down. The first week without her, I did what any reasonable man does. I went to work. Meridian Freight Solutions sat in a low brick building off South Boulevard, 10 minutes from the apartment I now had entirely to myself, 1,200 square feet, that had somehow gotten bigger and lonelier at the same time. I'd been a broker there since I was 26, moved carriers and cargo across the Southeast, built relationships with dispatchers in Memphis and Savannah and Jacksonville that were, in some ways, more consistent than my relationship with Natalie had been. My desk sat 2 down from Preston Doyle's, a guy who'd been hired 8 months after me and had made it his personal mission ever since to make sure everyone knew he closed more loads per quarter, even in quarters where that wasn't remotely true. Heard about you and Natalie. He said that Monday, not looking up from his monitor. Rough. Yeah. You good? I'm fine, Preston. He nodded like he didn't believe me, which was fair, because I wasn't, but I wasn't about to hand him that. Diane Kowalski, our VP of operations, caught me in the break room around 11, refilling her coffee with the particular efficiency of a woman who'd raised 3 kids and run a brokerage floor and no longer had patience for anything that wasted her time, including, apparently, my attempt to look okay. "You look like a man who didn't sleep," she said. I slept. "You look like a man who lay in bed with his eyes closed and called it sleeping." She poured cream into her mug, the same chipped blue one she'd used since before I started, and studied me over the rim. "Natalie." It wasn't a question. Word traveled fast in a building with 40 people and 1 shared kitchen. "She wanted different things," I said, and it came out clipped, more defensive than I meant it to. "Everybody wants different things," Diane said. "The question is whether you're willing to become a different thing to keep them close, or whether you'd rather stay yourself and lose them." She sipped her coffee. "There's no wrong answer, Grant. But there's an honest one, and you should figure out which one you actually believe before you decide you're fine." She left before I could answer, which was, I'd learn over the following months, very much her style. The apartment took longer to feel normal than the office did. Natalie's absence showed up in small increments I hadn't planned for. The bathroom counter with half the bottles gone. The Netflix profile still labeled Nat that I couldn't bring myself to delete for 3 weeks. The fig tree, which I watered on Sundays out of some misplaced sense of obligation, like taking care of it was the last thing tethering me to the version of my life that had made sense. I called my best friend, Marcus Whitfield, on a Thursday night because the silence in the apartment had started to feel less like peace and more like something waiting. "You want to get a beer, or you want me to just talk you through this over the phone?" Marcus said. He worked in commercial insurance downtown, and we'd been friends since college, back when neither of us had any idea what freight brokers or underwriters even were. "Beer," I said. We met at a bar in Noda, one of those places with local drafts and a patio strung with lights, loud enough that you could talk about something painful without the whole room hearing you say it. "So she just left," Marcus said, after I'd given him the short version. "She asked if we could stay friends." Marcus made a face like he'd bitten into something sour. "And you said?" I said sure. "Grant, what was I supposed to say?" "I don't know, man, something. Anything. You didn't even ask her to think about it." She'd already thought about it. That was the whole point. She'd thought about it for months, and I hadn't noticed. Marcus was quiet for a second, turning his glass on the table. "You gonna be okay?" "I don't know," I said, and it was the first true thing I'd said out loud since she left. The strange part about grief, if that's even the right word for losing someone who's still alive, still texting the group chat about a mutual friend's birthday, still existing in the same city 15 minutes away, is how ordinary it makes everything feel. I still went to work. I still ran loads, called carriers, negotiated rates with a dispatcher out of Nashville named Curtis who had no idea my life had quietly rearranged itself. I still went to the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because that was the routine, and routines don't ask permission before they keep happening. But there was a low hum underneath all of it, a static that didn't turn off. I'd reach for my phone to tell her something. A stupid meme. A customer who'd said something absurd on a call, before remembering, mid-motion, that I wasn't supposed to do that anymore. Or maybe I was. She'd said we could stay friends. But I didn't know the rules of that yet, and I was too proud, or too raw, to ask. 3 weeks in, she texted me. "Hey, hope you're doing okay. I left my yellow mixing bowl in the cabinet above the fridge. Is it all right if I swing by Saturday to grab it?" I stared at that message for longer than a message about a mixing bowl deserved. "Yeah, that's fine," I wrote back. Then, after a pause I'm not proud of, I added, "You didn't take the fig tree." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I know. I couldn't figure out how to fit it in the car, and I didn't want to just leave it on the curb. "Can you keep watering it? I'll feel bad if it dies because of me." "Sure," I typed, and then, before I could stop myself, "Feels like a metaphor." She didn't respond to that one. I didn't blame her. Saturday came, and she showed up at 11 in the morning wearing a gray sweatshirt I recognized. Mine, technically, though she'd claimed it 2 winters ago, and I'd never asked for it back, and an expression that was trying very hard to be casual. "Hey," she said, standing in the doorway like she needed permission to cross a threshold she'd crossed 1,000 times. "Hey." Bowls on the counter. She stepped inside, and I watched her eyes move around the apartment, cataloging what had changed and what hadn't. The couch was gone, replaced by nothing yet, just an empty rectangle of slightly cleaner carpet. The fig tree stood by the window, leaves a little yellow at the tips, but alive. You're keeping it alive? She said, sounding surprised. Turns out I can water a plant. She almost smiled. That's a low bar, Grant. I've been clearing some low bars lately. She grabbed the mixing bowl, held it against her hip, and lingered near the door in a way that told me she had something else to say and hadn't decided if she was going to say it. You seem different, she finally said. Quieter. I've had some quiet lately. I didn't mean it as a bad thing. I know. She glanced at the fig tree one more time, then back at me. I really do want us to be okay. Eventually. I know that's probably not what you want to hear right now. It's fine, I said, which wasn't a lie. Exactly, but wasn't the whole truth either. She left, and the apartment went quiet again, quieter than before she'd come. The particular quiet that follows a visit from someone whose absence you just started to get used to. I didn't decide to change anything that week. I want to be clear about that, because if I make it sound like some deliberate turning point, some montage moment where I looked in the mirror and decided to become a different man, that wouldn't be true. What actually happened was smaller and stupider than that. I couldn't sleep one night, so I opened my laptop and looked up the advanced freight broker certification course Diane had mentioned to me twice over the years, always in passing, always in a tone that suggested she thought I was capable of more than I was currently doing. I'd never signed up. There'd never been a reason to. Natalie and I had our routines, our Friday restaurant, our Sunday grocery runs to Trader Joe's, and somewhere in the comfort of all that repetition, ambition had started to feel unnecessary. At 2 in the morning, with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and a half-dead fig tree for company, I registered for the course. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it. I just started showing up 20 minutes early to work 3 days a week to do the online modules before my shift started, and I didn't mention it to Marcus or Diane or anyone, because some part of me wasn't ready to explain why I was suddenly doing this now, for weeks after Natalie left, like it meant something I wasn't prepared to say out loud. Preston noticed before anyone else did, mostly because Preston noticed everything that might threaten his position on the leaderboard. You're in early a lot lately, he said, leaning against the edge of my desk with the specific posture of a man fishing for information he planned to use later. Trying to get ahead on some things. On what things? Things, Preston. He didn't push further, which was unusual for him, and I wondered if something in my face had changed enough to make even Preston Doyle decide not to poke at it. Diane noticed too, 3 weeks in, when she caught the tab open on my monitor during a supply closet run for printer paper. CTB Advanced Cert, she said, reading over my shoulder before I could close the laptop. Since when? Since a few weeks ago. She studied me the way she had in the break room. That same appraising look, except this time there was something like approval in it. Good, she said simply. I've been telling you to do that for 2 years. I know. What changed? I thought about lying, about saying something vague about career growth, but Diane had never once accepted a vague answer from me in 6 years of working under her, and I didn't think this was the day she'd start. Natalie and I broke up, I said. I think I had a lot of time on my hands and nothing to do with it. Diane nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Grief makes people either fall apart or get very focused for a while, she said. You picked focused. That's not nothing, Grant, but don't mistake it for healing. It's not the same thing. I know that. Do you, though? I didn't have an answer for her, and she didn't wait around for one. Just patted my shoulder once and walked back toward her office, leaving me standing in the break room, holding a ream of printer paper I'd forgotten I was supposed to be getting. She was right, of course. I didn't understand yet how much I was using the certification, the extra hours, the small private discipline of it, as a way of not feeling the apartment. But understanding that would take longer than a break room conversation, and for now I let myself have the thing that felt like progress, even if it was really just distraction wearing progress's clothes. 6 weeks after Natalie left, I passed the certification exam. I found out at my desk, refreshing the results portal every few minutes like a kid waiting on college admissions. And when the green checkmark finally loaded, I didn't call anyone. I just sat there for a second, feeling something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite relief, something closer to surprise that I'd actually followed through on anything lately. I told Diane first, because she was the one who'd been asking. Passed, I said, standing in her office doorway. She looked up from her monitor, and for a second I thought she might just nod and get back to work, which would have been very on brand for her. Instead, she stood up, walked around her desk, and shook my hand like I'd closed the biggest account of the quarter. That's real work, Grant. That's not luck. She sat back down, but didn't dismiss me yet. You know what this means, right? You're qualified for the multimodal accounts now. The bigger clients. Higher margins, harder relationships, but real money and real growth if you can handle the pressure. You think I can handle it? I wouldn't have told you about the cert 2 years ago if I didn't. That afternoon, she moved 2 accounts onto my desk that had previously belonged to a senior broker who'd left the company that spring, a regional produce distributor out of Charlotte that needed reliable reefer coverage, and a mid-size manufacturer with lanes running up into the Midwest. Bigger accounts meant bigger headaches, longer calls, carriers who didn't return messages, and shippers who called Diane directly when things went wrong. It also meant, for the first time in 6 years, that I felt like I was doing something instead of maintaining something. I told Marcus that weekend, over beers again, same bar in Noda, though this time the patio was empty because it had started to drizzle and everyone smart had gone inside. Look at you, Marcus said, grinning. Break up with a girl, get a promotion. Very efficient. It's not a promotion. It's more accounts. Same thing, with extra steps and no pay bump yet. There's a pay bump eventually. Diane mentioned it. See? Efficient. He took a drink, then looked at me more carefully. You seem better. Not all the way better, but better. I don't know if I am, honestly. I just know I'm tired in a different way than I was a month ago. That's still something. I wanted to believe him. The produce account turned out to be the harder of the two, mostly because of a man named Roy Castellano, the ops manager on their end, who called at 7 in the morning and 8 at night and treated every delay like a personal betrayal. My first real test came in week 3, when a reefer carrier I'd vetted through 3 separate calls no-showed on a load of strawberries headed from a cold storage facility outside Charlotte up to a distribution center in Ohio. 96 pallets that had maybe 18 hours before the whole load turned into an insurance claim instead of a shipment. I remember standing in the parking lot outside Meridian at 6 in the morning, phone against my ear, calling every carrier in my network I trusted with temperature-sensitive freight, watching my breath fog in the cold while Roy texted me increasingly unhinged updates about the shrinking window. I found a carrier out of Knoxville who could make the pickup by 9 if I paid above lane rate, which meant eating into the account's margin for the load, which meant explaining to Diane why my first big test on this account came with a loss instead of a win. You made the right call, she said, when I told her that afternoon, bracing for something worse. A blown load costs us the account. A thin margin costs us a few $100s and buys trust. Roy will remember that you moved heaven and earth before he remembers the number on the invoice. She was right. Roy called 2 days later, gruffer than usual, but audibly grateful, and told me he was moving more of the account's freight to Meridian because, in his words, at least you people actually give a damn when something goes wrong. It wasn't a triumphant moment. Nobody clapped. I didn't tell Natalie, because I still had the reflex to tell her things and still had to catch myself. But driving home that night, windows down, the first real warm evening of the spring, I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled since the kitchen table conversation 3 months earlier. Not happiness exactly. Competence, maybe. The particular quiet satisfaction of having handled something difficult without falling apart. Natalie and I texted occasionally through those months. Nothing frequent, nothing charged, mostly logistics. A forwarded piece of mail. A question about the renter's insurance we'd once shared. Once, in April, she asked how work was going, and I told her about the certification, the new accounts, keeping it brief, unsure how much space I was allowed to take up in her curiosity anymore. That's really great, Grant, she wrote back. I'm glad you're doing that for yourself. I noticed the phrasing. For yourself. Like she already understood something about the certification that I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. That some part of me had done it not to become a better broker, but to prove, mostly to myself, that her leaving hadn't been an accurate final verdict on who I was. I heard through Priya, who Marcus's girlfriend Sophie was still close with, that Natalie had left her marketing job at the Beige Office Park and was building out a small brand consultancy of her own, working with a couple of local restaurants and a boutique fitness studio in Plaza Midwood. I felt something complicated hearing that. Not jealousy, not quite. More like recognition. She'd finally done the thing she used to bring up quietly in bed, half joking, the thing I used to say someday too. I wondered, for the first time with something other than defensiveness, if she'd been right. Not about everything, but about something. The setback came in early June, 3 months after the breakup, right when I'd started to feel like the ground under me was solid again. The manufacturer account, the one with lanes running into the Midwest, hit a wall when one of their key carriers got hit with a DOT compliance issue mid-route, stranding a load of industrial parts in a truck stop outside Indianapolis for 2 days while I scrambled to find a replacement carrier who could handle the specialized flatbed equipment the load required. I found one, eventually, but not before the client's plant manager called Diane directly, furious, threatening to move the account to a competitor. Diane called me into her office that Friday, and for the first time since I'd started at Meridian, she didn't sound like she was on my side. "This can't happen again," she said, flat, no warmth in it. "I moved this account to you because I believed you could handle pressure without letting things slip through the cracks." This slipped through the cracks. The carrier's compliance issue wasn't something I could have caught in the vetting process, Diane. They passed every check we ran. I'm not asking for an excuse. I'm asking for a plan. What changes so this doesn't happen again? I sat there, feeling something I hadn't felt since Natalie left. Not grief this time, but a specific, familiar flavor of failure. The sense that I'd been building something and it had just cracked under the first real weight. "I'll add a secondary compliance check before any specialized equipment load," I said, thinking it through as I said it. "And I'll build a backup carrier list for every account with equipment requirements, so we're never scrambling from zero." Diane studied me for a long moment. "Do that," she said. "And Grant, I'm not saying this because I think you can't do the job. I'm saying it because I know you can, and I need you to actually believe that on the days it's hard, not just the days it's easy." I left her office feeling worse before I felt better, but by that night, sitting at my kitchen table with the wobbly leg, I'd already drafted the framework for the backup carrier system, and something about doing the work instead of stewing in the failure made the failure feel smaller than it had an hour earlier. I didn't sleep much that weekend, but not in the way I hadn't slept after Natalie left. This was a different kind of awake, the kind where your mind keeps circling a problem because it thinks it's close to solving it. By Sunday night, I had a working draft of a compliance protocol that would flag any specialized equipment requirement before a load ever got booked, cross-checked against a running list of vetted backup carriers for flatbed, reefer, and hazmat freight. I brought it to Diane on Monday morning before she'd even gotten her coffee. She read through it at her desk while I stood there like a kid waiting on a report card, and when she finished, she set it down and looked at me for a second longer than felt comfortable. "You built this in a weekend? Didn't have much else going on. This is good, Grant. This is the kind of thing that gets rolled out company-wide, not just used on your desk." She tapped the page. "I want to bring this to the ops meeting Thursday. You're presenting it." I hadn't presented anything in front of the whole floor since a training session years earlier that I'd mostly stumbled through. "I don't really do presentations." "You do now," she said, already turning back to her monitor, which was Diane's way of saying the conversation was over and I'd agreed to something whether I felt ready or not. Thursday came, and I stood in front of 11 people in the conference room off the main floor, Preston included, arms crossed in the back like he was waiting for me to fail so he'd have something to bring up later. I'd rewritten my notes 4 times the night before, cutting anything that sounded rehearsed, trying to just explain the thing the way I'd explain it to Marcus over a beer. It went fine. Better than fine, actually. A couple of the senior brokers asked real questions, the kind that meant they were already thinking about how to use it, and Diane rolled it out to the whole floor by the following Monday. Preston came by my desk afterward, and for once didn't seem to be building toward some competitive dig. "That was solid," he said, almost begrudgingly. "Where'd that come from?" "Almost lost an account. Didn't want to almost lose another one." He nodded, and something in his face suggested he understood that answer better than I expected him to. "Yeah," he said. "I get that. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, but it was the first time in 2 years Preston had talked to me like a colleague instead of a competitor, and I found I didn't mind it." By August, 5 months out from the breakup, my life had taken on a shape I didn't fully recognize but had started to trust. I was running 4 accounts instead of 2, including the produce distributor, whose ops manager Roy now texted me directly instead of going through Diane, a small thing that felt disproportionately good. I'd started running again. Actual running. Not the treadmill sessions I used to half-heartedly do, but real mornings along the Little Sugar Creek Greenway before work, something Marcus had talked me into after I'd complained one too many times about not sleeping. The apartment had changed too. I'd finally bought a couch, a decision that took embarrassingly long, mostly because buying furniture alone felt like admitting something permanent about my life that I wasn't sure I was ready to admit. The fig tree had recovered fully, new growth pushing out from branches that had looked half dead in April, and I'd started to think of it less as Natalie's leftover responsibility and more as just mine, something I'd kept alive out of stubbornness that had turned, somewhere along the way, into something closer to pride. I still thought about her. Not constantly, not in the raw, reaching for my phone way I had in the beginning, but in a settled, background way, like a room in a house you don't go into much anymore, but know is still there. We'd stopped texting as often. I heard, through the same Priya to Sophie to Marcus pipeline, that her consultancy had picked up a fourth client, a wellness brand out in Ballantyne, and that she seemed, in Priya's words, genuinely happy, actually, which is annoying because I wanted to be worried about her. I laughed when Marcus relayed that. It didn't hurt the way I expected it to. The reunion, when it came, wasn't the kind of thing either of us could have planned, which I think is exactly why it worked the way it did. Meridian had started sponsoring a small business networking mixer every fall, something Diane had pushed for years to get the company more visibility outside the freight world, held at a renovated warehouse space in South End that had been converted into an event venue, exposed brick and string lights, and a bar serving overpriced local beer. I hadn't wanted to go. Client-facing events weren't really my thing, but Diane had specifically asked me to represent the new accounts team, and it felt like the kind of ask you didn't say no to 6 months after almost losing an account to a compliance failure. I was standing near the bar around 8, half listening to a conversation between two guys from a local packaging company, when I saw her. Natalie was across the room, in a green dress I didn't recognize, laughing at something a woman next to her had said, and for a second I just stood there, feeling the specific vertigo of seeing someone familiar in an unfamiliar context. She wasn't supposed to be here. Except, of course, she was, small business owner, brand consultancy, exactly the kind of person this mixer existed for. It made sense in the way things make sense right after they surprise you. She saw me a moment later. I watched it happen. The flicker of recognition, then something more complicated crossing her face, something between surprise and a kind of relief I couldn't fully read from across the room. She excused herself from her conversation and walked over, and I had just enough time to decide not to look like I'd been staring, which I definitely had been. "Hey," she said, stopping a few feet away, like she wasn't sure yet how close was appropriate. "I did not expect to see you here. Meridian's sponsoring it. Diane made me come represent the new accounts." "New accounts," she repeated, and something like a smile pulled at her mouth. "Look at you. I got certified in the spring. Advanced broker cert. Diane moved some bigger accounts onto my desk after. I heard. Through the grapevine. I'm really glad, Grant. I mean that. What about you?" Priya mentioned a wellness brand. "Yeah, Meridian Wellness. Actually, unrelated name coincidence. They didn't even clock it." She laughed a little, and it was easier than I expected, standing there with her, the two of us talking like colleagues who happened to know each other rather than two people who'd built a life together and then carefully, deliberately, taken it apart. "For clients now? I left the agency in March." "I heard that too. Small city. Small industry, apparently." We stood there for a second in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable so much as full, both of us aware, I think, that there was a lot underneath the small talk that neither of us had said yet. "Can I get you a drink?" I asked, because it felt like the kind of thing you say when you're not ready for the conversation to end, but don't know what the next real sentence should be. She looked at me for a moment, like she was deciding something. "Yeah," she said. "Actually, yeah." We ended up outside on the small patio behind the venue, away from the noise, 2 plastic cups of local IPA neither of us particularly liked, the September evening still warm enough to stand in without a jacket. String lights ran along the fence, and somewhere behind us the party kept going without needing either of us in it. "I think about that conversation a lot," Natalie said, after a while, looking out at the parking lot instead of at me. "The one at the kitchen table." "Yeah. I keep waiting to feel like I explained it right. I don't think I ever did." "You explained it fine. I don't mean the words. I mean," she stopped, turned her cup slowly in her hands. "I think I made it sound like there was something wrong with you. And there wasn't. There isn't. I just knew if I stayed, I was going to keep waiting for permission to want something bigger, and I didn't think that was fair to either of us." "I know. Do you?" "Because you said sure. Just sure. Like I'd asked you what you wanted for dinner." She glanced at me, not accusing, just honest. "I spent a long time wondering if you even cared. I thought about lying, softening it, telling her something easier. But we were past that, I think, both of us, 5 months and a whole reshaped life away from needing to protect each other's feelings with half-truths. I cared, I said. I just didn't know how to fight for something I already halfway agreed with. You weren't wrong, Nat. I had gotten comfortable in a way that wasn't fair to you. I just didn't figure that out until you were already gone. She was quiet for a moment, and something in her face softened, like she'd been carrying a version of that conversation for months, waiting to find out if I'd ever say it. I didn't expect the tree to still be alive, she said, and it took me a second to realize she meant it as more than a comment about a houseplant. I didn't expect a lot of things, I said. The cert, the new accounts, running in the mornings, which, if you'd told me in March I'd be doing that voluntarily, I'd have laughed at you. You look good, Grant. Not just, I mean you look like yourself, but more sure of it. You too. The dress is new. Client dinner earlier. Didn't have time to change. She smiled, and for a second it was almost like before, easy, except it wasn't before, and we both knew it. I'm not asking for anything, I said, because it felt important to say it plainly, before either of us mistook the evening for something it wasn't going to be. I don't think this is a getting back together conversation. No, she agreed, and there was no disappointment in it, just clarity. I don't think it is either, but I'm glad you're doing well. I mean that. I'm glad you went and did the thing you used to only bring up in bed at midnight. She laughed, surprised, maybe a little moved. You remember that. I remember a lot of things I didn't do anything about at the time. Me too, she said quietly. We stood there a while longer, not filling every silence, which was new for both of us, I think. The ability to just exist in a quiet that didn't need managing. Eventually she checked her phone, said something about needing to head out, an early client call in the morning. It was good seeing you, Grant, she said, and she meant it. I could tell, the same way I meant it when I said it back. Yeah, you too. She paused at the edge of the patio, halfway turned to leave. For what it's worth, she said, I don't think either of us did anything wrong. I think we were just two people who needed to become different versions of ourselves before we could actually be good for each other. Or for anyone. I think that's probably true, I said. She nodded, like that settled something she'd needed settled, and walked back inside, and I watched her go without the ache I expected to feel, just something quieter, something closer to peace. I didn't see her again for a few weeks after that, not in person, though we texted once, lightly, when she sent a photo of the wellness brand's first billboard going up off the 485 with a caption that just said we did it, sort of. I sent back a thumbs up and a genuine proud of you. And that was the whole exchange, and it felt right-sized, felt like the shape our friendship was actually supposed to take instead of the shape either of us had tried to force in the raw months right after. Diane noticed something had shifted in me around then, the way she noticed everything eventually. You seem settled, she said one afternoon, dropping a new lane sheet on my desk. Different kind of settled than back in March. I ran into Natalie a few weeks ago. The mixer. And nothing really. We talked. It was good. Closed, I think. In a good way. Diane nodded slowly. That's the kind of ending most people don't get, she said. The kind where nobody has to be the villain. It's been 4 months since that night on the patio, almost a year since the kitchen table conversation that started all of it. I've got 6 accounts now, a raise that came through in October, and a habit of running 4 mornings a week that I no longer think of as Marcus's idea, but just mine. The apartment looks like my apartment, finally, couch and all, and the fig tree sits by the window taller than it's ever been, leaves thick and green, the kind of thing that only grows like that when someone's been paying attention to it for a long time without needing credit for it. I don't know if Natalie and I will stay close the way we said we would that first week, the promise made across a kitchen table by 2 people who didn't yet know what staying friends would actually require of them. Maybe we drift, the way people sometimes do, gently, without any bitterness behind it. Maybe we don't. Either way, I think we did something rarer than most breakups manage. We let go of each other without needing the other person to be wrong first. She didn't expect my absence to change more than my presence ever had. Honestly, neither did I. But I think that's the truest thing about the whole year. That sometimes the version of yourself worth becoming only shows up after you stop being handed a reason to stay exactly who you were. The tree's doing fine, by the way. I water it on Sundays. Some habits are worth keeping, even after everything else has changed.